work, so we're gonna keep dying.
I know that my God is real. Okay? And I want to say that in this place, during all of this that's going on, there was an angel. There was my God standing right there with me the entire time.
Everything we know about this case comes from you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely what?
Everything you know about this case comes from me. You just said that. I agreed with you by saying the word absolutely. Where are you confused? Okay.
So one theory is there was systemic homophobia, they didn't care, and they just let it go, and they thought they would move on to other things. The issues with that theory are that Hamilton County only had about 2 or 3 homicides per year. So it's not as though there was this like massive caseload and it's Baltimore or LA where it's like, oh my God, the cops are so overworked, they've got to move on to the next one, and there's another victim who needs justice, etc. It was like, I don't know what it was they were moving on to. You know, so then you get to the darker, more conspiratorial theory, which is that were there forces at work that incentivized the police to not look into this case, to not look deeper into it? And I think that's a question.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Herbert Baumeister and the Fox Hollow Farm cover-up. In this video, you will see quite clearly that a string of murders was committed, and it is my speculation that it was committed by a ring of powerful individuals that had the ability to cover up this case for almost 30 years. Now, I don't know what I can and cannot be legally held liable for, so all of this is alleged. It's speculation. I'll make it clear throughout the video, but as of right now, Herb and Herb alone was responsible for these crimes. The police made a few mistakes that are hard to comprehend, but it is entirely speculation to say they were part of an active and ongoing cover-up. Mark Goodyear is innocent until proven guilty, and though multiple people point him out in police files as being involved in the crimes, it is entirely speculation to say he is or was an accomplice, so on and so forth. With all of that out of the way, I want to say thank you to all of the new subscribers and new members who have joined the channel. This is the very beginning of what will be coming in the future. Now, let's begin at the very start with the birth of the patsy, Herbert Baumeister. Born April 7th, 1947, Herbert Baumeister would be the eldest of 4 children. His father, Dr. Herbert E. Baumeister, was a well-known and well-respected anesthesiologist in and around Indianapolis, and his mother stayed at home and took care of Herb and his siblings. Little is known about his father, but we do know he was an Army veteran of the Second World War, and to Herb, he was a harsh disciplinarian. Even at times when others were present, Herb would not only receive verbal, but physical reprimands to which one friend noted Herb showed no emotion to. Moreover, said Donovan, the elder Baumeister's outbursts weren't only verbal. He'd spank him or kind of whack him across the head and say things like, "Herbie, how could you be so stupid?" These incidents sometimes occurred in front of other people too. Herb, though, never seemed fazed, even when his father became physical. He never showed any emotion. Outside of the house, Herb's life would appear normal. He had 3 other siblings, Barbara, Brad, and Richard, and had friends who would gather in the house with Herb for a club he created dedicated to monitoring the weather. But things would change when Herb entered his adolescence. Herb was more interested in intellectual exercise rather than the physical. So when his friends he grew up with took to playing the sports outside and Herb stayed in, a natural divide was established. But the same friend, Bill Donovan, that described Herb's father's abusive behavior would also point out the other reasons Herb would become alienated from his peers. It appeared Herb had a fascination with urine at a young age, and this fascination would begin to escape the confines of his mind. One time he asked Donovan what he thought it would be like to drink human urine. Other times he would actually urinate on his teacher's desk, a behavior that continued into his adulthood when he would urinate on his boss's desk. Another account from the Garden of Evil details Herb chasing other kids around and asking them for a taste of their urine. It became a game. Herbert would chase his friends around the yard, begging for a single taste. The strangeness of the situation would fade for a moment as they ran around, their hearts pounding in their chest with the thrill of the chase. It was just a game like all the rest they played. They laughed and screamed until they could run no more. When Herbert got too close, reality set in again. Herbert had always been a funny boy. At home, he was the one his family relied on to cheer them up whenever they felt down. As long as he was still making someone laugh, the adults in his life accepted his increasingly eccentric behavior. Given what we will cover later in this documentary, I think it is fitting to mention now that SRA cults often include children in rituals that consist of the ingestion of waste, such as urine and feces. Herb's fascination could be his way of trying to see if what he was going through behind closed doors was normal. Many accounts and books dealing with SRA detail incidents similar to this. I'm aware as of right now this connection is very loose and seemingly very far-fetched. Just the fact that he mentioned tasting urine does not mean that his family was part of or leading an SRA cult. But be patient, because I don't make mention of this for no reason. Herb also displayed a fascination with dead animals. Another account from this time tells of Herb picking up a dead and bloody crow and placing it on his teacher's desk as a prank. It is likely in this time, though most books don't put a date on it, let alone mention it, that Herb is sent away for mental examinations at the behest of his father. The diagnosis? Schizophrenia with possibly more than one personality. A diagnosis such as this almost guarantees Herb suffered from much more than a whack across the head. The propagation of an additional personality is almost always the result of long-term and severe abuse as a child. Given this diagnosis and the fascination Herb showed with urine, specifically the ingestion of it, and the reports of similar accounts of other children who show an early interest with human waste being involved in SRA cults, there is a very strong possibility that Herb himself was a victim of said cult behavior.
I'm kind of fuzzy on the confidentiality of certain people and things like that, but I'll try to go into as much detail as I can. So one of the most interesting aspects, other than meeting, Rob and Vicky and all of that, was meeting Mark, that former lover. Yes. He was really generous with time with us. He spent several days with us. We were there for 4 days total. And he led us through the forest, and he was pointing out, well, there was a body here and there was a body there and there's still a body here. And we're kind of thinking, how do you know this? But he's one of those people, he's a very interesting character. And I don't want to say anything disparaging, because he was extremely polite and, like I said, very generous with his time and really helpful. But have you ever met one of those people who they're really good at telling stories, and it's kind of hard to differentiate when they veer over into complete exaggeration and fabrication, and then they veer back into the truth, and you're sort of trying to muddle through it? And he was kind of one of those people. So I don't know how seriously to take some of the things that he said. For instance, one interesting thing was he told us that Herb was part of a satanic cult or coven or whatever you want to call it in the area that had a ton of members. I'm not really sure if we can believe that or not, but take it for what it's worth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Herb would graduate high school in 1965 and, like his father, would enroll at Indiana University, naming anatomy as his major. He would only stay for the first semester, then he would drop out. He landed a job at the Indianapolis Star as a copy boy. This job is suspected to have come from his father's connections. Somehow a local anesthesiologist was able to pull a job for his son that the book Where the Bodies Are Buried describes as a position for the children of prominent citizens. Regardless of his father's involvement, the control his father had over his life would be shown in other places not far down the road. For the rest of 1966, Herb would stay at the Indianapolis Star and make the very same impressions he did while he was in school. His co-workers found him odd, but his boss, Gary Donna, actually took a liking to Herb's eccentricities. Regardless, Herb also wouldn't stay there much longer and actually tried his hand again at school, right in the middle of the so-called counterculture revolution. The campus was rampant with LSD, and perhaps unsurprisingly, Eli Lilly, the company that worked directly with the CIA to produce mass quantities of LSD in 1954, was based in Indianapolis. Obviously, this drug didn't remain in the confines of the labs And soon, all over college campuses in the US, the next generation would be experimenting with a drug the CIA had written plans to use on a mass scale. This would be the environment in which Herb actually met Julie Sater, his first girlfriend and future wife.
When I was a sophomore at Indiana University, the IU football team won the right to go to the Rose Bowl.
It's game time.
And it was during the preparation to go to the Rose Bowl that I actually met Herb. My first impression was he was a lot of fun to be with. I enjoyed myself more when I was in his company. We were at IU in the hippie era when Republicans didn't really come out on campus. It was love and peace, and everyone kind of would space out on drugs and just talk in circles, and we never did that. Most of the things we did were just driving around, maybe getting a Coke here or there. I just had a good time. Yeah, college is a great time. I wish I could go back. Sometimes much better than adulthood.
Julie and Herb shared a few things in common. They were both young Republicans, they both liked cars, and perhaps most importantly, they shared a familial military background. Julie at the time was the daughter of a superintendent at the Naval Air Warfare Center, and of course, Herb's dad was a veteran of the Second World War. These two purportedly met at the IU Rose Bowl at the very beginning of the year. But by that time, Herb had actually dropped out of college again to pick back up his job at the Indianapolis Star. An hour kept the two apart while Julie was on campus, but that's not the only sense in which Julie and Herb would be kept apart physically. As mentioned before, Julie would be Herb's first girlfriend. The reasons for this being his off-putting personality, but also the fact that Herb himself was never interested in girls and never showed any interest in girls. Throughout their progressing relationship, Herb never grew affectionate, and by the time of his death, Julie admits they only had sex a total of 6 times, and she never even saw Herb naked. Given these two would have 3 children, the first coming 12 years after they met, there's no reason to think the 3 other occasions weren't attempts at children. Even on their wedding night, Herb did not consummate the marriage. One has to wonder what the young Julie saw in Herb. He was isolated and for good reason. His behavior had rightfully warded others off. The amount of interest he did show was forced by the nature of who he was. And who's to say any interest was shown at all? Herb never had any experience with women, and yet the first girlfriend he gets turns out to be his wife. A wife that would look past all of Herb's various and serious flaws. They dated for 4 years while Julie remained in school, and I suppose this whole time a better option was never made available to Julie. This relationship from the very start seems to be completely devoid of romance and serves the purpose of a pragmatic, even business-like relationship. Coincidentally, after Herb and Julie meet, there is an informational blackout and little detail is provided. Most books simply skip from when they first meet to when they get married. These 2 short accounts demonstrate this the clearest. We get this from the case of Herb Baumeister. Baumeister tried again at Indiana University in 1967. His father, who was still optimistic that his oldest son could make a career out of education, encouraged him to return to school. There are few specifics about the second attempt, but the result was the same. Baumeister left before the end of the academic year. Up until the early 1970s, this trend of scholarly false starts persisted, and this account from the double life of a serial murderer. IU has long been held as one of the more prestigious schools in the region, and Herb was initially happy to attend. This happiness would have a very short shelf life, however, and Baumeister would ultimately drop out after just 1 semester. This attempt at higher education would then periodically rekindle and burn out for the rest of the 1960s and early 1970s. The other books offer similar accounts, just in a less succinct way. Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing, but I think if we got a full account of these 4 whole years of Baumeister's life, we would find some very telling information. 4 years of Herb and Julie's relationship before marriage. 4 years of Herb coming on and off campus. 4 years of potential work history that we don't get a word on. Any one of these years could hold a key event that we are unaware of. But we will have to take what we get and pick up on Herb and Julie's wedding night.
Herb and Julie got married in 1971, right after Julie graduated from IU. Herb's declared major was anatomy. He had hoped to follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor. But despite his above-average intelligence, Herb never finished college.
When our family came along, Herb was very involved with the kids. I think we had very family-oriented values. You know, we didn't have candlelight dinners, and we didn't run off on romantic weekends together. We were much more family love.
Herb and Julie would marry on November 21st, 1971, and quickly they would move into their own place, just minutes from Herb's parents' house. Almost immediately, Julie's loyalty would be put to the test, and once again, she would prove her patience with Herb knew no bounds. In the beginning of 1972, Herb lands a job at the local BMV. It wasn't long after he started working at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, another job his father is rumored to have secured for him, that Herb began behaving strangely, ranting and raving at fellow employees for no apparent reason. It became obvious to Julie too that something was terribly wrong. He'd just sit in the living room and cry and cry and cry, a friend would later recall. What sparked this reaction in Herb is unknown to this day, but what we do know is this behavior did not sit well with his father or Julie. So, they had Herb committed just 6 months into his marriage. Herb and Julie were still newlyweds when Herb's father had him committed to LaRue D. Carter Memorial Hospital, named for LaRue Depew Carter, a prominent IU School of Medicine neuropsychiatrist and neurology professor, and the first president of the Indiana Council for Mental Health. The state-run psychiatric institution opened its doors in 1952. Its purpose was to serve as a research and teaching facility for IU faculty and students. Why the elder Baumeister chose to have Herb sent to Carter when he easily could have afforded a private hospital is unclear. His decision, though, said a great deal about the degree of help he felt Herb needed. If you were a doctor in this town back then, and you put your child in LaRue Carter, said one lifelong resident of Indianapolis, you were essentially admitting you knew he or she had a long-term problem. Said another longtime resident of the city, that's not where somebody who was just a little disoriented went. That's where somebody went if they had serious psychological problems. Julie visited Herb often during what ended up being his nearly 2-month stay at Carter. Almost unbelievably, though she would say it was because he began to seem like his old self once he returned home, she would later claim to have never broached the subject of Herb's hospitalization with either him or his father. The writers of Where the Bodies Are Buried lay the blame solely at the feet of Herb's father, but the author of The Garden of Evil says it was a joint decision between Julie and her father-in-law to have Herb committed. Whatever they did in the IU research facility called LaRue D. Carter Memorial Hospital seemed to have worked, as according to Julie, Herb seemed like his old self again. What actually went down at LaRue is unknown. Julie apparently never brought it up again with either Herb or his father. What we do know is in this time period at colleges and universities, on Army, Air Force, and naval bases, at prisons, hospitals, and clinics, and perhaps, most importantly for Herb, psychiatric institutions, a project known as MKUltra was taking place, and its main aim was to achieve mind control. Certain projects dealt with people like Herb, who had more than one personality. These projects dealt with getting one personality to kill without the main personality being aware of this action, making them perfect for covert operations in which secrecy was necessary. We don't know all of the facilities this project took place at, nor do we know the true extent of this project either, because a majority of the documents were shredded in 1973. The director of the CIA said MKUltra was a failure. George Brooks, one of the leading MKUltra doctors, went on to write the opposite, proudly touting his success at splitting soldiers' personalities for secret missions. Well, Herb comes from a military family, meets a girl who also had family in the military on a college campus just an hour away from the company that was synthesizing LSD en masse for the CIA. This girl would show loyalty that we know was not born out of romance, and she would stick with Herb though he was isolated from everyone around him. The same guy never showed interest in girls, and Julie, just the same, never got any interest from him. Yet they date for 4 years, get married, don't consummate the marriage. Then he gets sent off to a psychiatric institution for 2 months that was used for research by the same college he attended off and on for years at her and her father's bidding, according to one author. and he returns his old self, which is still a mentally ill person that would supposedly go on to kill well over 20 people all on his own. Then after Herb walks out of the IU research facility, he picks right back up at his job that he abruptly left for 2 months and continues on with his life like nothing happened. He even picks up a single college class at Butler University later in the year, the class being psychology. I couldn't find a smooth way to put this in here, but I have to mention it. Julie claims in her first year of marriage with Herb that he packed up his stuff, moved into a different room in the house, and refused to speak with her for almost a year. This narrative is left out of most books, as it comes from her police interview in 1996 that has only recently become public. Given Herb went into the mental ward 6 months after his wedding, this could be the period of time Julie is referring to. But that would mean as soon as they got married, Herb refused to speak to her and lived in a separate room. One really has to scrutinize Julie's role in this relationship, because there is nothing about these two that is romantic. So why did Julie stay past all of Herb's various and serious issues? I'll save my opinion for the end, but it's pretty clear the role she is playing with Herb. Herb takes his job back at the BMV, and over the years, starts working his way up the ladder. It's said Herb was a perfectionist, but given the amount of control his parents have had so far over his life direction, and in the securing of his job positions, it could be his promotions were the result of the very same nepotistic string pulling. Regardless, likely by the time of 1979, Herb had achieved the position of program director, as he and Julie would have their first child. It could be earlier though, as well, as Julie had been working as a teacher at Broad Ripple High School. Yes, the wife of a serial killer was teaching children, but by 1975, she actually quit her career and focused on charity work. It's likely she was able to do this via Herb's promotion, though it's never clarified when exactly Herb takes this position. The main reason it matters is I assume this position puts him under the boss that he would have when he eventually leaves the BMV, which would mean he either had this boss for 6 years or for a whole decade. Why does this matter? Well, Herb took to urinating on his boss's desk on more than one occasion. People in the BMV knew it was him, and yet this behavior was tolerated. Surely, this had nothing to do with the influence of Herb's parents. Besides urinating on his own boss's desk, he would also let his worst tendencies come out when he became the boss. Sexual harassment was commonplace, and Herb had a habit of coming and going as he pleased. He even gets his first mugshot in this time, after he took some of his young subordinates, who were all male, out to a rural property to drink in the middle of the workday on September 3rd, 1985. While out there, Herb gets into an accident with one of the boys' cars. He then takes the car and makes it disappear and has Greg Moe, the owner of the vehicle, report it stolen. The next month, Moe receives the insurance money and everything seemed to be going okay. But then those in the BMV that found out actually brought this incident to the attention of Fred Hayes, who is described as the liaison between the BMV and the state police, and Hayes began an investigation. Hayes already had a dislike for Herb, as these two had been working together for years at this point, and given the free reign Herb had, it's clear to see why they didn't get along. Now Hayes had him practically dead to rights, caught in something that should not only get him fired, but charged and arrested. March 27, 1986, Herb and Moe both had warrants issued for their arrest. They were charged with theft, a Class A misdemeanor, and conspiracy to commit theft, a Class D felony. By this time, Herb had already been fired or left. It's not exactly clear how it happened, but we do know why it happened. Herb had urinated on his boss's desk for the last time, as his boss had a letter for the governor written and ready to go that was soaked before he could send it. It seemed the combination of these factors led to his departure. Just a few days after the warrant was issued, Herb was taken in on April 3rd and shortly posted bond. Everyone involved that day agreed to testify against Herb, including Moe. Herb waived his right to a jury and put the entire case in the judge's hands. Suddenly, when the day comes, almost a year after Herb's arrest, those that were to testify are described by Hayes as having gone wishy-washy on the stand, and Moe refused to testify. The judge found Herb not guilty on all counts. Herb was now unemployed, and Julie had to pick her job back up at the school to make ends meet. By this time, Herb had 3 children. Marnie was born in 1979, Eric in 1981, and Emily in 1984. By the time Herb's charges had been dropped in or around April 1987, Herb's father had died. November 12, 1986, Dr. Herbert E. Baumeister passed at a local Methodist hospital at the age of 66. Supposedly, Herb showed little emotion to this, and up to and even past this point, Herb had not been speaking with his mother. Julie tells of a 4-year time span in which Herb cut his mother off after an inheritance from his uncle's death was to be handled by his brother-in-law instead of him. This silent treatment actually came to an end when Herb approaches her in 1988 asking for a loan to start up his very own business. After Herb's firing from the BMV, and with his father gone and his mother cut off, Herb had to fend for himself for once, and he eventually landed as a manager at a local thrift shop. Seeing how poorly the one he worked at was ran, and having his own ideas ignored, he figured he'd give the thing a shot himself. Borrowing $350,000 from his mother, Herb and Julie founded Thrift Management Inc. and opened the first Save-A-Lot in the same year. The couple paired up with a local charity for children, the Children's Bureau of Indianapolis, who alone raked in $50,000 from Herb and Julie's store in the first year. Over the next 3 years, they would build on their business and open another store while saving to get what Julie called her dream home, the perfect place, Fox Hollow Farms.
Oh, this home feels so nice and comfortable. It just wraps itself around you.
For the next 5 years, the bones of what is now up to 25 separate victims would accumulate in the backyard of this 18-acre estate. Gay men from Indianapolis would disappear in quick succession, and it wouldn't take long for Mary Wilson from the Indianapolis Missing Persons Division to make a connection. Little did she know that she would actually begin an investigation into a killing spree that has been going on at this point for a little over a decade. Beginning in 1980 with Michael Petrie, a child prostitute, young gay men from Indiana would turn up dead and strangled after a short disappearance. 6 of these bodies turning up across state lines in Ohio, sparking their own investigation into a serial killer. The bodies coincidentally stopped turning up in 1991, the year Herb and Julie bought Fox Hollow Farms. By this time, David Lindelof, the lead investigator in what would be called the I-70 Strangler case, would have 2 solid pieces of physical evidence, a handprint and a semen sample. He also had an eyewitness account from 1983, when the friend of victim Mick Riley saw him last with an unidentified man. The I-70 Strangler case is actually open to this day. By the time Lindelof would have his main suspect, Herbert Baumeister, he would be dead via a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the forehead. You might wonder how there is still speculation on whether or not Herb was the I-70 Strangler, when they had a handprint, a semen sample, and an eyewitness account. All of this evidence is there to confirm or deny, to rule in or rule out Herb. Well, we'll see why this case and connection is still open a little later in the video. For now, Herb is still alive and is just about to begin harvesting young gay men from Indianapolis for the making of his own snuff films.
I spent a lot of years trying to convince people of a story.
Answer the riddle. Not an accomplice, not a victim, never attacked. What am I?
By August 1994, 8 men had disappeared from the gay scene in the Indianapolis area. People already suspected a serial killer, including IPD investigators, and warnings were given at the gay clubs to let friends know if you were leaving with a stranger. Posters were mounted on the walls with phone numbers to contact if you had any info. 2 separate investigations were actually going on by this time. One private investigation team was looking for one of the victims, and Mary Wilson's investigation from the IPD Missing Persons Unit was looking for a killer. Soon, both would get a story that led down the path of discovering where exactly all of these missing men had gone.
It was at a club called 501. I ran into Herbert Baumeister. He was staring at that wall, floor to ceiling, missing persons posters. I could tell that he was very gratified to look into these posters. It was not a normal encounter.
August 5th, 1994, Herb was in Club 501 when he was approached by Mark Goodyear. Herb had been looking at the posters, but instead of showing concern, he looked as if he was gratified, proud. Goodyear sensed this man might have something to do with the disappearances, and when Herb eventually invited him over to the mansion he was house-sitting for his boss, well, Goodyear thought this was the chance to see if his suspicions were right. Now, we get 5 different versions of this account. Each and every one of them are different. We get the police interview, which is available online, and the links to each of these will be in the description. We get his account in the A&E documentary that was recorded in February 1997. The next year, we get the full and chronological account of his night at the house in the book Where the Bodies Are Buried. In the same book, his story is retold, this time to private investigators. Then finally, we get the 2025 account from the Hulu documentary. I know we are missing another version from 1997 as well. Goodyear also did an interview with Fox 59 that I have not been able to locate. If you know of any other versions or can locate this one, please share them in the comments. For now, we'll stick with the version Mary Wilson and Virgil Vandegrift, a private investigator from the Indianapolis area, would work with in the beginning of their investigations. Goodyear told a story of being taken to this mansion in Carmel, Indiana, around half an hour outside of the city. Something Farms. He couldn't remember the full name of the property or how to get there, but he knew the name had farms in it. When they get inside, the man who gave the name Brian gave Mark a drink, but Goodyear quickly excused himself to the bathroom and replaced the mix with water. Surrounding the pool and by the bar were multiple mannequins posed in different positions. Brian shortly offered another drink, which Goodyear rejected. Brian could hardly hide that he was annoyed at this, but soon excused himself as well and came back in a better mood than Goodyear had seen earlier. Mark assumed the man had done cocaine as he began rambling about many different topics, but eventually he would land on erotic asphyxiation. By then the men were in the pool, and Goodyear would find the pool hose around his neck, but he clarified this was not an attack. This was an invitation. Goodyear's quick reaction to the hose suddenly being around his neck cued Brian that Goodyear was not under the influence needed to take on a man of his size. Brian was over 6 feet, but Mark was just taller than him. Regardless, the two men reciprocated the act on one another, to which Brian, in a state of euphoria, would begin espousing all the things he liked about erotic asphyxiation. How the eyes would bulge, and the lips would swell and crack, and the skin would turn color. Goodyear was in concern for his life, but it got even worse when Brian began telling him about the accidents that had happened. Soon after the act, Brian would pass out on the sofa by the pool, and Goodyear took it upon himself to search the house. He felt strongly this man was involved in the disappearances of the gay men in Indianapolis, some of which he knew, and now he could see how they met their demise. He went looking for clues. The house was filled with junk. The rooms were hard to determine what they were used for. One room he could tell was a bedroom for 2 children, as there were 2 twin-sized beds in there, and it was the most kept room in the house. Yet in the closet there were no clothes, only shelves of videos and video equipment. By now, the only other person that knew he was in potential danger was his sister, as he called her via the first phone he found in the house after Herb had passed out. Still, she had no clue where he was, only that he was in Carmel, Indiana. It was in the early morning hours. He could hardly get a look in the house while it was still dark, as the only place in the house that had the power on was the pool area. Goodyear quickly got the impression that nobody lived there at all, and that nobody had lived there for years. The sun began to rise, and Brian would wake from his sleep and was off quickly to take care of paperwork at his office, leaving Goodyear at his house alone. Mark roamed the house, but he found nothing that would indicate any of the gay men that went missing had been there. Regardless, he knew that if he survived, he would have a story to tell the authorities. Well, he certainly did survive, and we'll see that he was never even in danger to begin with, if this story even happened, which I do not think that it did. Brian would soon return, and he would drop Goodyear back off at the club where he left his car the night before. The two men would exchange numbers, and Brian would suggest they meet again next Wednesday. Now, if you go research for yourself, you will see the story I just told you doesn't always fit, as like I said, the 5 accounts we get are sometimes slightly different and other times vastly different from one another. I'll repeat it now, it is my opinion this whole event never happened, and the varying accounts we get make more sense from that lens, but my opinion rests on evidence much stronger than differing accounts. Soon, Goodyear would get on the phone with both the FBI and the local police, but according to Mark, they didn't take him seriously. Not long after, he would be put in contact with Virgil Vandegrift and his assistant Connie, who were hired by the mother of the most recent disappearance, Roger Allen Goodlet. Goodlet disappeared in the hours of Thursday night and Friday morning, between July 21st and 22nd. According to his mother, he wasn't planning on going out that night and was dodging calls all day from his friend Jeff. Goodlet's mother, Catherine, would pick up the phone telling him that Roger is not there, but Jeff was persistent. He kept asking for help moving some appliances in a job that had some money at the end of it. Finally, his mother told Roger to just take the call, and so Jeff convinced Roger to help. Later on, they were spotted at the bar together, but before the night was over, Roger would be on his own hitchhiking for a ride back to his house. Jeff apparently promised another person a ride home, so Roger would have to find his own ride. John Childers, a friend of Roger, last saw him at the Flags, a place he and Goodlet referred to as Goodlet's office, which was a park near the city's main library where male prostitutes were known to hang out. As Childers drove by, he saw Goodlet get into a light blue car with an Ohio plate and a driver that he thought might be bald. This was the last time anyone saw Roger alive. But of course, Goodlet wasn't the first to go missing. He was just one among 7 other men that began to disappear in the summer of 1993, starting with Johnny L. Bear, who disappeared after a shift at a local McDonald's, last seen on May 28, 1993 by his mother. He never did see his mother again, and nobody heard from him for several days. On June 9th, his car was found in an area of the city frequented by male prostitutes. It had received 8 parking tickets in the time Bear had been gone. Dewey, his mother, reported him missing the next day, but it would be years until she discovered what really happened to her son. Jeffrey Allen Jones would disappear next. The 31-year-old was last seen outside the Salvation Army Center. He had a history of drug and alcohol abuse, and had actually promised to sign up for a detox program there at the Salvation Army, but no record showed he ever signed up for such a program. He was last seen by a friend of his the next morning on July 3rd, but would never be seen again. Just weeks later, 20-year-old Richard Hamilton would be reported missing on July 31st, 1993 by a close friend and seemingly a customer of Richard's named Douglas Anderson. The 61-year-old man was reportedly obsessed with Richard. This is according to other hustlers that Richard knew. Richard indeed had been part of the gay community and stuck to a routine of hanging around 2 particular corners for money. He had a record of prostitution, but none of this was known to his family. They knew he wandered and would come and go as he pleased, even leaving a cross-country hitchhike to California. In fact, Richard never even gave off a clue that he was gay. He had brought girls over to his parents' house on 2 or 3 occasions, and his sister even heard a rumor that he had fathered a child. He had a missed court date, and so initially the disappearance was not filed under a missing persons, but instead he became a wanted criminal with a warrant out for his arrest. No one would find out what happened to him until almost 3 years later.
August 7th, 1993. Alan Livingston, 28, last seen getting into a white vehicle. That same night, Manuel Resendez, 31, went to a nightclub with some friends. When it came time to leave, the friends couldn't find Manuel.
Just a week later, and on the same night, 2 men would disappear. Only one program gives the description of when Alan Lee Livingston disappeared, and that's the A&E documentary. A few articles managed to detail the date Livingston went missing, but no book has managed to do so. I've got 5 different accounts to source from. Most don't even mention this victim. Even still, there are inconsistencies. The program dates his disappearance as August 7th, but the articles list it as August 6th. Why there is a discrepancy is unclear, but it perhaps has to do with the fact that another man disappeared on the same exact night. How exactly is Herb supposed to accomplish this? We get the story from Goodyear that his killings, if he was the one killing and if this truly was his manner of killing, that they were very up close and personal, drawn out. Well, supposedly he managed to do this not only to Alan Lee Livingston, but also Manuel Resendez. They both disappeared on the same night. Alan was last seen getting into a car, and Manuel disappeared in one of the clubs. Finding an exact date on Manuel's disappearance is a challenge too. Again, out of the 5 books I have on this case, not one of them details the exact date he went missing. Better yet, not a single book or program makes a note of the fact these 2 men disappeared the same night, except the A&E documentary. Even still, the program doesn't question it and just continues on. Let me know what you think in the comments. Why is this fact ignored, and I'd say covered up, given most accounts don't even give you the dates they disappeared when they had access to them? To me, it's clear they did this so they didn't have to account for how Herb was supposed to have done this alone. After that night in August, it would be another 8 months before the next victim would disappear. In April, Stephen Hale, 27, was bailed out and never seen again. The person who bailed him out? The same man who was obsessed with Hamilton. The police later looked into Douglas Anderson for obvious reasons but found nothing on his property. They used cadaver dogs to see if any corpses were present at his home. And that seemingly is the extent of their investigation on Anderson. Anderson indeed had another connection to one of the missing men in the area, revealed in this clip.
During the investigation, we started to examine all the commonalities that were involved to find out who we could definitely say knew who.
And the police do have a suspect, a man who had a relationship with 2 of the missing men.
We certainly felt we were on the right track. What we were trying to do from that point on is not only tie him in with actually just 2 of the people that were missing, but see how many other connections we could make.
It doesn't take long for the IPD to make those links.
We found later on another one of our missing persons also had a personal relationship with this person. He was looking to be a pretty good suspect to us at that time.
Police now have reason to search the suspect's home.
We did make a site visit to his home with his permission. We took cadaver dogs with us, made a thorough examination of the property, looking for any depressions in the ground that might indicate that someone had been buried on the property. But once again, as the investigation played out, that proved to be a dead end for us.
Articles online say Hale disappeared April 1st, 1994. Where the bodies are buried simply places his disappearance in April. Yet a newspaper article from the time of Herb's death states he was last seen in August, and the A&E documentary places it in July.
July 1994, only days after Roger Goodlett disappeared, Stephen Hale, 26, vanished from outside Indianapolis Central Library, a known gay cruising area.
Two months from April, and 28-year-old Alan Wayne Broussard would go missing on June 6th, last seen coming out of the gay bar, Brothers. Alan worked at an AIDS clinic, but that wasn't his only source of income. Sometime before this job, he worked as a stripper for a few months at the Unicorn Club. He also prostituted himself through an organization that fronted as a catering company. There is no further information that I could find on this prostitution ring, and there's no further information on who he was last seen with. Before Vandegrift would receive a call from the mother of Alan Goodlett, he would actually receive a call from the mother of Alan Broussard. There was a 30-day waiting period on filing a missing persons report on people who disappeared without any evidence of foul play. Crucial hours would be wasted in waiting for these 30 days, and the mothers of these 2 men took it upon themselves to find their sons. In his investigation on both of these men, he would actually stumble across the disappearance of Alan Jones. His case shared similarities with both Alan Broussard and Alan Goodlett, as they were all gay men from Indianapolis and had all worked or were working as prostitutes. And of course, they oddly all shared the name Alan. In fact, the name Alan appears a total of 7 times in both the Fox Hollow murders and the I-70 stranglings. I have no idea why. But Vandegrift wouldn't be the only one to notice the similarities in these cases. Mary Wilson had already been investigating the disappearances from the last year, and now she was dealing with a new set of missing men. Quickly, both Vandegrift and Wilson suspected a serial killer at work. It wouldn't be long after Goodlett's disappearance that they would have their suspicions confirmed. After Goodlett disappeared and his mother went to Vandegrift, they began their search and talked to locals, but also put up posters everywhere they found important. Soon tips came in from all directions. Many of them were completely useless, of course, but they soon would receive the one and only break they would get. It would also be the only one they would need: Mark Goodyear. It just so happens the man who introduced Goodyear to Vandegrift was none other than Jeff, the man who hounded Goodlet to help him move appliances. If that's even the truth of their activities and not a cover story he gave to Goodlet's mother. After Jeff is one of the last people to see Goodlet alive, he's the one to introduce Goodyear, who goes by Tony in this quote, to the private investigators. Several days after the Childers tip, Jeff called Catherine, breathless with excitement. There had been a breakthrough in Roger's disappearance, he said. This Tony guy I know might have gone home with the guy that picked up Alan, he told Arujo. Tell Tony to call Vandegrift's office, she urged Jeff. Catherine alerted Connie that a call might be coming from someone named Tony, but when Connie heard the source was Jeff, she was discouraged. Jeff had seemed like a nice enough person, but he'd done more in the way of looking for information than in offering it. Given this Jeff character will not appear in this story again, I want to say this now. Goodyear will be shown as this documentary unfolds to be far from a survivor, and it is my speculation that he very clearly played the role of an accomplice. His narrative to the police is ultimately meant to be confusing, but he ensures the takeaway is Herb is the killer. Being that Goodyear is potentially entwined in the murders himself, Goodlet's as well, I find it odd this Jeff character persisted in getting Goodlet out that night, only to leave him at the bar. Then he's the one to introduce Goodyear into the case, and Goodyear plays the role of covering up his own involvement and pinning all the murders on Herb. There is no information on this Jeff person anywhere else, but I find his story and his involvement very questionable. It wouldn't be long after Goodyear came forward that Vandegrift felt he should get Mary Wilson involved. Mary Wilson had been investigating these disappearances for well over a year now, and she wasted no time in figuring they were connected. Vandegrift and his team gave everything they had to Wilson, and contrary to Goodyear's earlier encounter with police, she would take him very seriously. Wilson and Goodyear take their first trip out to Carmel the same month of his encounter to look for the property which Goodyear suspects is the final resting place for these men in the Indianapolis gay scene. They had no luck. Perhaps the long driveway and the leaves on the trees were obscuring the view, making it hard for Mark to spot the house. They would return when the leaves had fallen. During this time in the 90s, Carmel wasn't a very populated area, and there were only a handful of properties. Goodyear knew it had farms in the name, but a lot of these properties out there were very large, and a lot of them were also farms. Still, with the limited amount of options, Goodyear was unable to spot the house. After the first failed attempt, Wilson had Goodyear draw a map of the property. She also ran checks on the name that was given to Goodyear. At first, he remembered the man saying his name was Brian Smart, but now he was sure his name was Brian Statz. License pictures from the two men with the name in Indianapolis were shown to Goodyear, but they of course both resulted in negative identifications. They were both too young, he said. Wilson noticed only one of the men had a criminal record, this for stealing a car. Specifically, he was arrested for stealing the car of his boss, Herbert Baumeister. They were back to square one and waiting for the leaves to fall, and when they did, Wilson took Goodyear out once again, but to no avail. Given the men had exchanged numbers, she hoped Brian would call Goodyear from a phone they could trace. Goodyear, it would seem to them at the time, was actually determined to find this guy. Before Wilson got involved, Goodyear actually helped Vandegrift and his team attempt to bust this Brian guy by staking out the 501, where Mark and Brian were supposed to meet the Wednesday after their first encounter. He was a no-show. Now Goodyear was drawing maps and driving around with Wilson, being as cooperative as he can seem. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to help Mary Wilson in the IPD. It seemed they were stuck until Brian made the first move, and soon he did. Goodyear would call Wilson in an apparent panic after Brian showed up to Goodyear's house. In the book Where the Bodies Are Buried, we get a quick encounter where Brian is shortly scared off by the detail that Goodyear's boyfriend was there. In Mark's police interview, we get the added detail that Goodyear attempted to take a picture of Brian but failed to do so, and also was unable to see the car he was driving, let alone the plate number. Decades later in this year, with the release of the Hulu documentary, we get Goodyear saying he gave Herb his address.
A lot of people who've followed this, they think that you only spent one night total with Herb, but you had a relationship with him.
I don't want to describe that as a relationship.
Were you guys romantic?
We'll save that for another one as well. How about that?
But you saw him more than just that night.
The man stalked me. Okay? When I left here after that first night, he dropped me off at my car. I immediately bolted to drive to my grandmother's home. He must have followed me because he shows up at my grandmother's home. This is like within a week. He was stalking me, and I realized that, because I had gave him my address after he showed up at my grandmother's home.
So he was coming to your grandmother, so you gave him your address?
Yes. Gave him the address and gave him the other phone number to get him out of her home.
Herb started to show up there at his house, but in no other account do we get the details on any other occasion in which Herb showed up to Goodyear's house except this one time. But believe me, we'll be going into more detail on Goodyear here shortly. This encounter would mean relatively little for Mary's investigation, but it did confirm that Brian was still interested in Goodyear. Past the holidays and into 1995, Mary and Mark went again to look for this house in Carmel, but again to no avail. According to where the bodies are buried, she left the lead with Goodyear. She tasked him with getting a plate number, and they would go from there. Well, that day would come when Goodyear turns up with a plate number, but before then, 2 more men would disappear. On March 31st, 1995, Michael Kern would disappear. The 45-year-old was never seen again. Later that year, on August 8th, Jerry Williams Comer went missing. His car was found abandoned at Castleton Square Mall. It's unfortunate that Goodyear happened to be the one relied upon to further this investigation because he apparently was not very good at relating pertinent information to Wilson. Any account before 2025 would have Goodyear telling he only saw Herb at his house the one time, that he had seen Herb at the bars 4 or 5 times before approaching him in 1994 about Goodlet, and that once the two exchanged numbers, Herb would call Mark multiple times. This would be the extent of their interactions before Mark sees him for the last time in August of 1995 when he finally gets his plate number down and hands it to Wilson. But if we now take into account his latest statements, we get a total of over 10 different interactions before he turns the plate in, meaning he had over 10 different chances to find information on Herb that would fulfill his goal in getting this guy investigated and locked up. Yet not a single one of these interactions was related to Wilson. So, let's go through each interaction we can glean before he turns the plate in and begins the controlled downfall of Herb. First, Goodyear admits he's seen Herb before but never interacted with him. In fact, in one of the accounts, he explicitly states he's seen Herb with Goodlet around the time he disappeared. Then we get the night they supposedly met for the first time, but in Goodyear's police interview, he says he could have met Herb before 1994. After that, we get the calls Goodyear received from Herb. No idea how long the calls lasted or the subject of them. After that, we get Herb showing up to Mark's grandmother's house, as he says, within the first week. Then we know Herb shows up to Mark's own place, to which he has no answer as to how Herb found him in each account, but with the added information that Mark simply gave him his address, his lies to Mary Wilson and the police are a lot more telling. After he gave him his own address, Mark says he saw him spontaneously. He said sometimes Herb would show up specifically when the marriage got rough, meaning there were times Herb also showed up that had nothing to do with the marriage, indicating in this sentence alone several times in which Herb had shown up to Goodyear's house, and none of them are documented.
How often would you see him?
Oh, spontaneously. Things were getting real bad, I guess, in the marriage. He would show up upset about things like that.
Another instance, Goodyear tells of Herb being in his house while he was on the phone with police, yet we know he didn't call Mary Wilson because she actually seemed to be doing her job.
A lot of people will ask me, why did you go on and continue interacting with this man or having anything at all to do with this man or anything else? Hell, I'd gone to the police the moment I had left his company. I was on the phone to the police. Any move that this man made, I was on the phone reporting it to the police.
Even when he showed up at your house?
I'd sit there on the phone with the police with him in my house. Didn't bother him. They ain't never gonna believe you. They are never gonna believe you. They think that you're nuts. They are never, he was that sure of himself. I was on that phone 6-7 times a day with the police. And yet they're telling me, we can't find the place. I said, well, I certainly can't take you up there and put your hand on a stack of dead bodies. I'll be sitting in the Indiana electric chair. You know what I mean? It's just not something that it would be wise for me to do.
Another time, Goodyear describes chasing Herb down alleyways between the different bars and confronting him in front of everyone, getting on top of furniture and telling everyone he is the killer.
There's an alleyway that connects all the bars in downtown Indianapolis. I'd stalk him through that alley corridor, chase him from bar to bar. Now, I'd stand up on furniture, scream out to the crowd, don't nobody leave with this man. He is the killer. Well, he'd stand there with his hands in his pockets. They ain't never gonna believe you. They ain't never gonna believe you. They're not gonna believe you. They think you're crazy.
In all of these instances, he never once gets anything useful to Mary Wilson in her investigation. In fact, given her statements, it seems she had no idea any of these encounters happened. The next and last encounter she would be privy to would be when Goodyear actually comes back to her with the plate number in hand on one August night in 1995. Before the beginning of the end for her began, he had some close calls of his own at home.
Early in the year of 95, my son and a friend of his had been walking in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon. And he came to the back door downstairs and said that he had found bones, and we went and looked, and they looked like human bones. There was actually a head or a skull or whatever, a round thing. And then there was a slight amount of other bones there as well.
Burnt, smashed, and scattered, fragmented, and strewn about in 3 different locations, one of which was actually on his neighbor's property, were the remains of these missing men. So 8 out of the 10 men that we know of that were found on Herb and Julie's property were already there by the time his son decided to go play in the woods with his friend in December of 1994. What his son Eric came upon was a full skeleton and skull, all in one spot, all intact. Eric thought nothing of it and decided to prank his sisters with the skull by planting it on top of a stick and placing it in front of a window. Not as amused as Eric, Julie tells him to show her where he found this human skull. He leads her not far into the woods just beyond the yard. There, she finds what she describes as a full skeleton, like someone just laid down and died.
I told them the story about my son having found bones in the backyard.
Mrs. Baumeister said it looked like someone had laid down and died. It was a complete skeleton.
It's impossible to know who this specific victim was, but the last known victim by that time was Roger Allen Goodlett, who disappeared July 22nd of the same year. It could have been a victim who disappeared even earlier, or it could be a victim that has yet to be identified. The pattern of Herb's killings show they always took place in the summer, specifically when Julie and the kids were away at Lake Wawasee. Herb would stay in Indianapolis all week to keep up with the businesses and would meet with the kids and Julie on the weekends. So we have a conundrum here. If the body was a victim we know, the last of that year being Goodlett, then his body would have been placed there towards the end of July, and yet his bones were completely undisturbed. An alternative would be the bones were undisturbed because they were fresh, and this is an unknown, unidentified victim. But that would mean Herb committed a murder with Julie and the kids at the house, as it would have occurred not in the summer, but in the fall or winter. Regardless, what this tells us is by this time, Herb had not done anything in regards to disposing of the bodies. Given the animals didn't get to the corpse in months, and whoever this was wasn't smashed and scattered or burnt but fully intact from head to toe, like Julie said, as if someone just laid down and died, then perhaps Herb hadn't done the same with his earlier victims, and indeed there were 7 other men laying in the woods just beyond the house that supposedly were never discovered by Julie or the kids. When Herb got home, Julie questioned him, but he told her the bones belonged to his late father, who had them displayed in his office for his medical practice. He figured the raccoons who lived in his attic drug the bones out there. Yes, by this time, Julie and Herb had a raccoon infestation in their $1 million mansion. Remember when Goodyear said he felt nobody lived there and hadn't lived there for years? We will get to that in a little bit. Earlier in this year, Herb was just north of Lake Wawasee, where again his wife and kids would go each summer to stay at Herb's mother's lakeside cabin. When on July 2nd, he was pulled over and taken in on drunk driving. And pushing for leniency from the judge, he wrote this. You can take the time to pause and read it yourself, but in short, he claims his wife had died and he was taking care of his 3 children alone. He had already delayed his day-and-a-half incarceration to July 10th, 1995, and seemingly is proposing to the judge to waive his 36-hour stay in jail. The judge was unmoved and he spent his allotted time behind bars. What I find most notable about this is not that he pronounced his wife dead to try and win the sympathy of the judge, but what is revealed in the motion of his proposal, that Herb had his license suspended, even up into the next year when this letter is being written. As the letter mentions, he's writing this on June 29th, 1995, almost a year after the incident, and he states that his income had increased now that he doesn't have to worry about transportation expenses. So I find it interesting that Herb was continuing not only his illegal activities, but his day-to-day business duties on a suspended license for a year and got away with it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but he was on the road all the time, so it's not like he was avoiding being noticed either.
By August 1995, 10 men in 3 summers had vanished without a trace from Indianapolis bars. A year after Mark Goodyear had his first encounter with the mysterious man, he finally spotted the man again in a downtown bar. Mark asked a friend to follow the man outside and write down his license plate number, and then went to the police with the information.
August 29th, 1995, Herb walks through the doors of the Varsity Lounge. Goodyear, who again has seen him in person and talked with him over the phone several times for the past year, spots Herb and makes a distraction. He lets his friends know that this is the guy who took him to his mansion a year ago, the one he suspects of being a killer. He tells his friend Albert don't let him leave without getting his plate number. Goodyear approaches Herb and points him out, telling everyone he's the killer and how he strangled the missing gay men that many of the people there knew personally. Quickly after that, Herb leaves and Albert jots down the plate number to the car that Herb gets in. Now, we have to question the motive for this move against Herb. We know Herb knew where Goodyear was the whole time, and he made a point of seeing him regularly. But what I haven't told you up to this point was that Goodyear himself knew how to get back to Fox Hollow Farms the whole time. For a year, he had regular contacts with Herb and knew how to get back to Fox Hollow. But for some reason on this day in August 1995, he decided Herb had to go down. We will get into the potential motivation for that here shortly as everything begins to unravel. With the plate number in hand, Wilson quickly tied the vehicle back to Herbert Baumeister. In going over the information she could gather on him, she noticed his previous arrests. She noticed here that Brian Statz was his employee, and she may have also noticed this was the man they had already tried to get a warrant on not long ago.
We were trying to find the property by driving around the north side, by communicating with police agencies up there in that area. We came up with one house up on East 156th Street that we felt was a potential property to look at.
Vandegrift sends out his #1 investigator to survey the property, located in nearby Hamilton County.
He said it's got a big windy driveway, goes back, and he drove the property and looked around a little bit, and he said, this is it.
You know, I think one of the amazing things was that the description provided by the foreman of a long, winding, circular driveway leading down to a mansion type house, really matched up considerably.
Police traced the house to respected businessman, husband, and father, Herbert Baumeister. But in conservative Hamilton County, no one is willing to grant a search warrant on the basis of what they deem an unbelievable story. And soon, the suspected killer is back on his beat.
Back in August 1994, within the short time between Goodyear sitting down with Virgil for the first time and Virgil passing Goodyear on to Mary Wilson, they actually found the house. And Virgil Vandegrift's team was Bill Hillsley, a former state trooper with 24 years of experience who knew the area well. Scouting out Hamilton County, which again has been told to be sparse in terms of the people that lived there, he'd soon find a house matching Goodyear's description. Upon looking further at the home, up close as he had driven down the long driveway to get a look, he wasn't as sure. Still, he eventually got aerial photos of the estate. For some reason, he didn't just take pictures of the house from the perspective everyone sees it from, and they show these photos to Goodyear, who said the driveway wasn't long enough. At first, Mary wasn't so sure Herb was their guy because all of his paperwork was pointing to a house in Indianapolis, the one he and Julie purchased just after their marriage. Most documents she could get her hands on pointed away from Carmel, until she found one document his employees had filled out for him. It was a police report for theft, and on the report, Herb's listed address was the exact house they had already stumbled across multiple times. It also listed 2 numbers for Herb, one of which was the one Goodyear had been using. She also found out that Herb's businesses were failing and on the verge of bankruptcy. She quickly got in contact with the Children's Bureau Executive Director, Ken Phelps, who was very familiar with Herb's stores and who told her the businesses really began to fail within the last year. Just before she met with Phelps, she also met with Fred Hayes from the BMV. She asked these men to keep these meetings between them, and of course, they did. Hayes never liked Herb, and Phelps didn't want to interfere with a police investigation. All along the way, she was careful not to tip off Herb to her search. Among the files she could gather, she also saw paperwork regarding divorce filings. She could see Herb and Julie's relationship had seen strain, which would only be worsened with the failing businesses. Although Herb's house seemingly matched the description given by Goodyear, and the plate number traced back to Herb, Mary still had to be sure, and there was only one real way she could do that. She asked Goodyear to look at a group of pictures including Herb's mugshot and tell her if he recognized any of the men in there. It could be that one, he said, pointing at Herb, but I can't be 100% sure. Again, given Goodyear is a suspected accomplice, his failure to ID Herb makes more sense. Still, in the moment, Wilson couldn't go off of a maybe. She wanted to be sure. There was one other option she could try that she felt would square this away in her mind. Whether Herb was the man worth looking into. She had to know if Fox Hollow Farm had an indoor pool. She telephoned the owner of the estate that bordered Fox Hollow. He wasn't home, but she left a message and he promptly called back. Yes, he knew the Baumeister family, but not that well, he informed Mary. He'd spoken to them only a few times, but he had been in the house once before they had owned it. And yes, it did have an indoor pool in the basement. Why was she asking? Mary would now dig in on her investigation into Herb, and she didn't keep this a secret. Not to the police, that is. Mary would become a shopper at the Save-A-Lot stores, and on multiple occasions, she would try to catch a glimpse of Herb. She was hoping to just run into him one day and ask for a talk, but she could see this wasn't going to happen. By November, Mary felt she had enough to question Herb, and so she did on the 1st of the month. Wilson and Lieutenant Thomas Green walked in and went to the counter to ask for Herb. They didn't even know if he was going to be in, but he came out shortly. He told them he was busy at the moment, and all agreed to meet later on the same day. Walking away, Wilson and Green sensed Herb was stressed. Just that little interaction alone put him on edge.
After 3 months of background checks, Detective Wilson went to his Save-A-Lot store to confront him about the missing men.
My first impression of Mr. Baumeister when I first saw him at the store was this is a very strange man. He was very tall and angular, and his hair, possibly he had hair color in it. Physically, he looked effeminate, but he was so very nervous. I felt like we kind of pushed him to the edge just approaching him. He just looked like he was about ready to fall apart.
When they came back, they confronted Herb on his presence at the gay bars, which he initially denied, only to concede when Mary told him they confirmed his car was there. He told them he didn't want his family to know. At this point, Mary asked flat out if they could search the property, and of course Herb said he would have to defer to his lawyer. Who was his lawyer exactly? Looking into who this man represented in the past shows an interesting connection. This man had previously defended Robert David Little, the man Larry Eiler implicated in his crimes, and also a professor at Indiana State University. Oddly, there was a back and forth between Wilson and Voiles. She would call him and he'd tell her he's not representing Herb. Calling Herb, he assured her the man was indeed representing him, only for Voiles to deny it again. For a couple weeks, it apparently went on like this until finally Voiles told her she would not be granted permission to search the property. With nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to, she decided it was worth exposing Herb to get to the truth. She approached Julie on November 30th, 1995.
But when the investigators requested permission to search Baumeister's property, he refused. Their only alternative, approach his wife.
I wasn't sure, that Herbert Baumeister had anything to do with any of these missing men, and I felt like to approach a lady and tell her something that she didn't even know about her husband. It was a tough decision, but I decided we needed to either rule him in or rule him out.
One day, they called me in the back room. My cashier called and said, there's 2 people here to see you. And I walked up in front, and they identified themselves as being from the Indianapolis Police Department and said that they were investigating Herb for a homosexual homicide. And I cannot begin to tell you the degree of life that left my body at that point.
Julie had already been forewarned that if the police were to come to ask her if they could search the house, she should say no. Herb told her this had to do with a false accusation of theft against him. She was even told by Herb's lawyer the same thing before the police even talked to her. Talking to Julie, the police hit a roadblock. Neither was willing to let the police search the property, and Hamilton County wasn't going to grant a warrant.
She seemed to pretty much be in shock that she did not let us come on the property at that point.
I said, if you've got evidence, you get a search warrant. I said, I'll be happy. I'll take you on a guided tour. I'll have a luncheon for you.
But with only circumstantial evidence, Detective Wilson couldn't get a search warrant.
It takes probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed, and we simply didn't have it. We had Mark's story of what had happened up there. We had missing people, and that was about it.
There was one other thing they thought to try. On April 16th, 1996, they flew over Herb's estate to see if there might be any fresh corpses lying on the property. They were looking for a heat signature, but found nothing. Once again, the case would stall until someone close to it, or potentially involved in it, would move the investigation forward. Since police approached Julie, her and Herb had been going through it. In the same month that Mr. and Mrs. Baumeister were approached, Herb's lawyer for the business, John Egloff, had to call the police on Herb for a welfare check after a phone call he had with him. The phone call was obviously going in a certain direction, where Egloff got the impression this would be the last time he would speak with Herb, or anyone would, for that matter. But before the call ended, Herb would tell him there's a guy he's afraid of that might target his family after he's gone. He told John Egloff in this call that he was afraid of Mark Goodyear. After the call, Egloff phoned the police and told them about Herb's situation. Not long after, Egloff received a call. It was from Herb, who berated him for calling the sheriff and getting Julie upset. The two never spoke again. In the coming weeks, Herb and Julie would begin to unravel, leading to Herb separating himself from Julie. Indeed, they spent Christmas apart.
Herb had left the house, and we spent the Christmas season a year ago apart. It was a very horrible financial time for the businesses, a strenuous time in our relationship.
In fact, the Baumeisters' business was floundering, and they were on the brink of foreclosure. All around them, their dream life was collapsing.
On January 4th, Julie actually filed for divorce after attaining attorney Bill Wendling. Julie later claimed that she had no intention of following through with the divorce. She filed, she said, primarily to get Herb's attention. I didn't want our family to fall apart, nor did I want out of the marriage. I wanted to make him realize that although business circumstances would probably force us to change our lifestyle, we had our family and we had love, and that would sustain us through the bad times. Still, in court documents related to the divorce filing, Julie alleged that Herb suffered from serious emotional instability. Wendling would later say that claim was based on the November 1995 incident in which Herb called John Egloff, threatening to. Julie described thrift management as being in serious financial jeopardy. She also requested temporary custody of their children. Wendling said this stemmed not from concerns that Herb might be violent or from suspicions that he might be involved in the men's disappearances, as the police claimed, but from Julie's belief that if Herb didn't have to worry about taking care of the children, he could focus 100% on the thrift stores. Said Wendling, she wanted to make sure he had an unfettered ability to operate the business. Finally, Julie asked for a restraining order that would keep Herb from residing at, approaching, entering, or coming about their home. According to Wendling, this request was more of a formality than anything else, designed to mainly ensure that Herb, who had already moved out of the house, wouldn't come waltzing back in. There was nothing happening that said I needed to fear for Julie's safety, Wendling said. But Julie's intentions were clear. She told the court the marriage was irretrievably broken. Yet, as it happened when Herb had filed for divorce in 1991, that turned out again not to be the case. Within weeks, Herb was back at home, and on January 31st, both he and Julie agreed to postpone indefinitely a scheduled preliminary hearing on the divorce. In between the months of Julie's first confrontation with police and her finally letting police on the property, she would make multiple calls to Wilson and really impress on her that she had the wrong guy.
Over the following weeks, Julie's shock and sadness about her husband turned to anger and disbelief.
I called Mary Wilson back several times and really challenged them to say, I don't believe you, this isn't the person I know. This is not someone I have ever in my life seen yell to the point of slapping his children. I have never seen him throw anything. He has never even come close to even giving me a bruise by holding my arm. And you're trying to tell me he killed someone? It didn't add up.
These calls likely happened while Herb was out of the house, as she would blame Wilson for the current circumstances of her relationship. Wilson made sure to let her know the informant she had knew the house well. He knew things that one would only know if they had been in the house. This is when Julie makes an interesting claim given what we know now about the relationship Mark really had with Herb. He was a weirdo, a criminal bent on revenge for some strange reason. In reality, the downfall of Herb, though seemingly directed by Goodyear, may stem from another reason in an incident that happened earlier in the year of 1995, but we will get to that in a little bit. Though Herb and Julie reconciled for the moment, things would begin to compound. Herb soon stopped showing up to his store, and it was clear to the employees of Save-A-Lot that they wouldn't have a job for much longer. By May, the Children's Bureau would cut ties with Thrift Management Inc. By late June, Herb placed his employees' last checks on the counter of his store and told them to come pick them up. By this time, Herb and Julie were again not talking. It seems Julie was gearing up to let police search the house, as soon, Mary Wilson would receive a call in late spring, as the book Where the Bodies Are Buried puts it, and in this call, Bill Wendling, Julie's divorce attorney, assures Wilson that there is something there and she should keep looking.
I never, of course I could not tell her some information that was confidential with my client.
Obviously, he knew something that he couldn't say.
It would seem that Julie Baumeister had told her attorney a crucial bit of information that she had not mentioned to the police, that her son had found a skull in her backyard.
It wouldn't take long before what Wilson was looking for would be found. Just days after Herb's employees received their last checks, he took his kids to get physical examinations on Thursday, June 20th, and planned on enrolling them the next day at Culver Military Academy for a 6-week summer program.
In June 1996, in the midst of a maelstrom of financial and marital troubles, Herb Baumeister's erratic behavior pushed Julie too far. He impulsively closed down one of their stores and took their only son on an unexpected vacation to Lake Wawasee.
Julie hit the roof. She immediately filed requests for an emergency hearing regarding custody of the children and for an order preventing Herb from enrolling them at Culver. The marital estate, she argued in court papers, cannot support the husband's unilateral decision to put the children in Culver. As evidence, she cited Herb's own February filing in which he claimed Thrift Management was insolvent. Julie's filings also stated the parties' financial matters are out of control and asked for a preliminary hearing to determine the method of payment of the parties' mortgage and utilities. In fact, said Wendling, the couple's finances were in such bad shape at the time that the electricity at Fox Hollow was about to be shut off. It's unclear how exactly the next few days played out, as Julie would soon have both her daughters back. But Herb and his only son Eric were staying 2 hours north at Lake Wawasee at Herb's mother's lake house. The stage was now set for one of the biggest alleged cover-ups that I have ever seen. On Monday, June 24th, 1996, Julie would invite Mary Wilson to Fox Hollow Farm. Wilson would invite Captain Tom Anderson and Detective Jeff Markham from the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, and they would all convene with Julie to discuss what she and her son found a year and a half ago. The day before, Wendling had called Wilson and told her about the skull Julie had found on the property. Of course, the question arose as to why Julie hadn't come to the police earlier. She believed her back then, but now after the confrontation with Wilson 7 months ago, she had her suspicions. Her main reason for calling them over was because she wanted her son back. Let's keep this in mind given what they are about to find in the backyard. Julie and her lawyer are supposedly unaware that over 10,000 bone fragments are lying in the backyard at that moment. Wilson obviously suspects she's going to find something that would lead to her finding the missing gay men of Indianapolis, but no one is supposed to know about the thousands of bones in the backyard other than Herb. So when Julie takes them out to the backyard and shows them where she found the skull in December of '94, it's hard to say what she expected. In the book Where the Bodies Are Buried, Wilson, Anderson, and Markham understand they are there to look at bones, but outside of the mention of the skull found in '94, there is no other discovery of bones. So of course, when Julie takes them over to look where the bones were before, they find nothing. Julie leads them to a spot that has previously been burned, and that's all it looks like to the men from Hamilton County, the remains of a recent fire. Then, both Anderson and Markham knelt down when Jeff pulls out a bone, brown from a fire and about a foot long. Julie gasped and appeared shocked, to which Anderson felt was the phoniest expression of shock he'd ever heard in his life. Quickly, they noticed more bones. Large bones on top of smaller fragmented ones. With their eyes attuned, they started to see multiple spots in the backyard that not only bones lied in, but teeth as well. Human teeth are the most easily recognizable, as our teeth are unlike any others found in animals. Still, they had to be sure. Markham began taking pictures and Wilson began to bag the bones she found. Wilson would take the bones to Stephen Naraki, a local anthropologist, while Markham and Anderson would head back to the station. One of Anderson's key takeaways was the feeling Wendling had already known where all the bones were. He also felt, of course, that Julie knew more than she was letting on. Wilson arrived with the bones later in the evening. And yes, Naraki confirmed the bones were human. But not only that, he specified the remains were recent, a fact that increases the chances of foul play significantly. Wilson immediately let Anderson and Cook know. So, in this scenario, what would anyone in charge of a criminal investigation do? Lock down the crime scene, take Julie and the kids off of the property, locate and question Herb. It turns out Hamilton County wanted to take it slow and disregard basic protocol as they decided to return the next morning to continue the search, and they allowed Julie and the kids to stay on the property overnight. Crucial hours would be lost there where potential evidence could have been disturbed or destroyed. The next morning, the search began, but for some reason, Sonia Learcamp, a prosecutor for Hamilton County, decided Julie's allowance of the search was enough, and they really didn't need a search warrant. The next step was to check with the prosecutor's office to find out what actions were within their legal power. Anderson placed a call to Sonia Learcamp, Hamilton County's prosecuting attorney. "We've got human bones on an estate in Westfield," he told her. "Lots of them, looks like." "Oh no," Learcamp groaned. "Oh yeah," Anderson shot back. He told her about the Indianapolis men, Tony Harris's night at the estate, and the Baumeisters' impending divorce. Did they need a search warrant? Julie had extended an invitation for the next day, he explained. Julie's invitation was enough for Learcamp. If a property co-owner allows a search, a warrant isn't necessary, she told Anderson. "I know I'm not a legal expert by any means, but this is incredible to me. To make sure you have everything in order and that there's nothing the defense can capitalize on seems paramount in any investigation. But for some reason, instead of being extra careful and overly sure, they just go on Julie's word. They would be extra careful and overly sure in terms of bringing Herb in, as they wanted to make sure they had the right guy. But when it came to procedural caution on a serial killer case, nah, we'll just take the word of the serial killer's wife. This didn't go unnoticed by others around her, and luckily enough, Wilson went ahead and got a warrant anyway. Quickly, they begin to find hundreds of bones, burned, smashed, fragmented, and scattered in what turned out to be 3 distinct spots, not only in Herb's backyard, but in his neighbor's as well. The first day alone, on Tuesday the 25th, Naraki figures there's certainly more than one victim. We know now they were victims, but for some reason the burned bones that were determined to be fresh didn't tell anyone in Hamilton County this was foul play.
The gay investigations, none of that is true. Right now, like I said, we're just looking at it as a death investigation. The only crime that's been committed is unlawful burial of a human body without a permit at this time.
Keep this in mind for what's about to happen. The same day they are searching the house, Milligan sees the TVs by the pool, and he also notices a loose vent above the pool area that he figures was a perfect spot to put a hidden camera in. So he questions Julie. "We got burnt and broken up bones all scattered in the backyard. We got a multiple-year investigation going on into a man that turns out to be Herb. Now we got both the story of the potential strangulation by the pool and a loose vent that Milligan figures was used to house a hidden camera to film these activities."
So you're saying he might have been making films?
It's possible, yes. But he was recording something illicit. That's why he got rid of the tapes.
Goodyear, of course, stated in his interview that he found a closet full of camera equipment. With all of this in mind, hopefully, he asks Julie if Herb kept any videotapes in the house. Yes, he did, she says. Right this way. She takes him to a closet in the pool area where she said Herb kept hundreds of videotapes, but she was baffled. They were gone. He must have took them. So by now they have plenty of reasons not only to question Herb, but to bring him in. Well, perfect timing would come in, as from the start the reason Julie let police onto the property was so that they could go get Eric from Herb. They told her she would need a court order for them to do anything. So Julie files an emergency custody order that is to be fulfilled on the 25th, the same day they're searching the house. So 2 birds, 1 stone, right? They go up to Lake Wawasee, take Herb in, and return Eric to Julie. They secure the tapes and finish at the house and begin to stack charges on Herb, right? Nope. They act on the court order to retrieve Eric, but they leave Herb at the lake house because they say they didn't have enough evidence to take him in, let alone to question him.
We really didn't have much information to go ahead and try to detain Herb Baumeister or question him at length.
They also assumed Herb was not going to run, so they didn't put any surveillance on him.
A court order was obtained and got Eric away from Baumeister and brought him back to be with his mother. And then Herb was on his own.
So they're face to face with Herb.
Yep.
Why don't they bring him in?
The The prosecutor's office didn't think there was enough evidence yet. There was a lot of sour apples about that. You've got several dead bodies on a guy's property. It was a lot of finger pointing. Why wasn't he arrested? Due to manpower issues with the search at the farm and all that, hard to keep surveillance on him. They didn't feel that seemed like he was going to run.
The guy who preemptively removed hundreds of tapes from the house that Kerry Milligan himself suspects showed evidence of his crimes. The guy who clearly had foreknowledge that the police were going to be searching his house. They didn't think this guy was going to run. So they leave Herb there with the tapes and with nobody watching him. As Sonia Learcamp would put it, by the time they realized his potential link to the bodies they were finding, they could no longer locate him.
As we started to realize the scope of what had happened and his potential link to the bodies that we were finding, we could no longer locate him.
Of course, it didn't take very long for them to figure this out, as it was the very next day on Wednesday that they decided to try and take Herb in, but could no longer locate him. Now, this looks very much like they let him get away, but surely this is just good old incompetence. A single night of surveillance on Herb would have prevented this, but it seems they were determined to let Herb escape with the tapes that would never be seen again. I wonder what or who was on those tapes, and why all protocol was abandoned so Herb could offload the tapes to who knows where. They never turn up intact or destroyed, so they very well could still be out there. While they were trying to locate Herb, they interviewed Julie and Eric separately, not just about finding the skeleton, but also any important info they could get on Herb. This is when police find out the true dynamics of Herb and Julie's relationship. She told them almost everything we went over earlier in the video. That leads me to believe this relationship was strictly business and was not born out of romance. In fact, an employee of Herb's once said after she saw Herb and Julie together for the first time that she figured they were co-workers. She was shocked to find out that they were married. Herb, meanwhile, was making a run for Canada, something that wouldn't be kept secret for long as reporters quickly got wind of his plan from his neighbor.
So a reporter that I worked with called Herb, and he answered. We were shocked that he would even pick up. Herb talked to us for about 60 seconds, and he told her he was in Indianapolis. He had talked to the neighbor, and the neighbor told us then that their understanding was he was going to go to Canada.
Police began tracking his movements from wire transfers his brother Brad was making to him. By Friday, Herb was in Fenville, Michigan. The 29th, the next day, he was in Port Huron, and Ontario police said he was in Sarnia, which borders Port Huron in Canada, the next day. For the next 4 days, Herb's movements and actions are unknown. The next time anyone involved in the case would see him, he would have a bullet hole in his forehead.
The morning of the 4th of July, I got up very early, and I saw car lights come up towards the house. It was my attorney, Bill Wendeling, and he had come to tell us that he had received a phone call that Herbert had been found dead in Canada.
Julie's reaction was utter dismay. She emotionally collapsed and was crying very hard. The children were coming down the stairs, and when they realized what would happen, they were crying very, very hard. And it was not a very pleasant scene.
You need to kill yourself? We'll save that for another damn show. How about that? I'm not trying to do 25, okay? Yes. I can tell you at the end of his life, his fingers were round and swollen as sausages. There's no way he could have pulled that trigger.
Kathleen Clark, who was one of the investigators sent up to Canada, was told by local police that one of their officers had actually stopped Herb the night before his death. He was sleeping in his car under a bridge, and in the back seat was a box full of videotapes. Again, No tapes were ever recovered intact or destroyed from the selection he removed from the house. At the scene of his death, the man who discovered Herb's body claims there was no gun there.
So where's the gun? I was there. I'm standing over the body. There's no gun there. Trust me, I had a really good look around. There was no gun there.
It was also stated the manner in which Herb was laid out was ritualistic in nature. This coming from Virgil Vandegrift.
1996. When Herb up in Canada, he kind of made a ritual type scene.
How?
Himself. He raised the sand up and made a kind of an altar type thing out of it. His arms were spread out. He had some dead birds laid out.
It was also discovered Herb's car had the carpeting removed from the inside of the vehicle, something pointing very clearly to the cover-up of a homicide. The missing gun and ritual scene were dismissed by investigators, including Carrie Milligan.
No, the gun was there. Yeah, there was rumors that they had some kind of like satanic altar and shit set up. That's all bullshit. He was just dead right there.
The ripped out carpets remains a mystery without an answer. In fact, it appears investigators simply never questioned the missing carpets or what motive Herb would have to rip them out. Also discovered at the scene was a 3-page note that was addressed to Canadian authorities. We do not have direct access to the entire note, but from what is detailed by those who have read it, Herb rambles on about his family and the business. Nothing is mentioned about the victims or any illegal activities that took place at the farm or elsewhere.
You just, there's so much more that you can do when you're going to, or you are motivated to do when you have someone you're actually going to prosecute. It's not that we stopped still trying to find answers, but it just limited knowing that it wasn't going to be a prosecution.
With Herb dead, the investigation had much of the wind taken out of its sails. Julie and the kids moved back into the old house soon after and started life anew, changing her and her kids' names back to her maiden name, Sater. Still, the police did continue to identify remains for years, but somewhere along the lines, this was halted. They also continued to take witness statements and conduct interviews. One such interview was with John Egloff, Herb's attorney, that reported him to the police the day after they interviewed Julie for the first time in November of '95, because according to him, it seemed Herb was in danger from himself. Herb, though, made it clear to Egloff the danger came from another. Egloff seemingly made no mention of what Herb said to him about Goodyear to police when the call first happened. But now that Herb was dead, and the details surrounding his death looking very much like a homicide cover-up, he went to police with this very detail in mind, that Herb was scared of Goodyear.
I got a call from Herb Baumeister last November 29th, and he started out the conversation by telling me that 5 minutes after he hung up, he wouldn't be around anymore. And he went on to tell me that there would be a note for his wife behind a picture of their kids in the den, and that I wasn't supposed to call her until later that evening. Apparently to give him time to do whatever he was going to do. I interpreted this as, he said that, oh, by the way, he said that he had gotten involved with somebody named Mark Goodyear. And he spells a name. And he said, this guy was a really bad dude. He said, I woke up one night and this guy was trying to strangle me. And he's been kind of stalking me, and I hope that he doesn't come after my family after I'm gone. And there is some more information about this guy above the lockers in my West Side store. So none of that was ever found. The note to his wife, whatever was above the lockers in the West Side store, none of that's ever been found.
In this call to Egloff, Herb discloses he kept information about Goodyear above the lockers in his West Side store. What kind of information would Herb have on Goodyear that would matter if Mark was simply a survivor? Whatever info was kept above the lockers was no longer there when police went to check on this tip. To my knowledge, this is the first piece of information that Hamilton County has received that points to Goodyear being more than a survivor. Just a few months later in October, police sat down with a man named John Fulham. Fulham claimed he also had been taken to Fox Hollow Farms once, and he also had a strange encounter. Police heard his story, and his credibility is established when he gives a detailed account of the house beyond which could be gathered from a view of news footage. His account takes place on July 4th, 1993. At this point in the official story, the only victim at this time would be Johnny L. Bear, and the next victim, Jeffrey Allen Jones, would actually disappear in 2 days. The account Fulham gives is very similar to Goodyear's. He's picked up at one of the gay bars, he's taken to Fox Hollow. The only difference between this account and Goodyear's is Fulham drives himself. We get no detail on what actually took place once he got there, but we do get the description of the man who took him there. He was around 6 feet, straight brown hair, no facial hair, but he was also in his 20s, around 25 or 26. Herb was 46 at this time, so that's not adding up. The police show him a picture of Herb, and he says that is not the man who took him to the farm that day.
And it wasn't Herbert that you were there with? No. This isn't the individual you were with? That is not him, no.
He says the man who took him out to the farm had the name Michael or Mark.
It was the guy, I'm trying to think, either Michael or Mark, and he was house sitting for his boss.
Police apparently never showed him a picture of Goodyear, and now they never will, as Fulham has passed away. This account very clearly points to Goodyear, but it is not certain. What is certain is that someone other than Herb took Fulham out to the farm under the pretense he was house sitting for his boss. The next story police would receive would leave no room for doubt. 4 months after Fulham talked with police, a man named Leroy Bray would come forward with information he has about a murder that took place at Fox Hollow Farms. He was out there for what is supposed to be a surprise party. He has a few drinks. He felt the drinks were pushed on him, and he also felt they were laced. It's unclear how many people are there, but Bray has a history with Herb. Next, he's out on the back porch, and he's soon, in his own words, introduced to several different people.
And I thought we were having a barbecue or something. And I was introduced to several different people.
He's confused about what's going on, and he's told they are all going to do some theatrical stuff, like a play. A man comes out in a raincoat with a hat and a mask on, shortly followed by 2 young guys. One of the young men asks, "What's going on?" when the other turned and held him and handcuffed him, while the man in the raincoat pulled a pistol and shot the man 3 times. This was followed with a single shot from a shotgun. Someone came over and held the shotgun on Bray, while the man in the coat took off his disguise and shouted, "Surprise!" This man was Herbert Baumeister. He asked what this was about, and he was told,
"Well, we don't like snitches and we don't want any trouble."
Quickly, him and another man named Danny Covert ran off into the woods and escaped. The man who was shot he had never seen before, but he told police the man who held his arms and handcuffed him was Mark Goodyear.
He's saying that you were present for a murder.
Okay, what year is he talking about?
95.
So why do you suppose I was never arrested then?
No, I'm not saying I think you're involved.
Oh, no, I'm asking you though, if there was these people that were saying that I was, people that I know that were saying that I was, then why wasn't I arrested?
I don't think that they had, clearly they didn't have any evidence.
This happened in 1995. What else happened in 1995? Well, in August, Goodyear finally turns a piece of information in on Herb that actually leads to his downfall. It could be this incident with 2 escaped witnesses that pushed Goodyear into finally pulling the thread to unravel the killings at Fox Hollow. Of course, it was never up to just Goodyear though, was it? From this account alone, we have multiple suspects, Herb and Goodyear, but also the several people that came out and that Bray was introduced to that saw the shooting happen. Unfortunately, to this day, both Fulham's account and Bray's are not available to the public in full. We know Fulham's interview was taped as well as Goodyear's, but we only get the transcribed version of Goodyear's interview. But again, no version of Bray's or Fulham's account is available in full. It's also likely they taped other interviews that would shed a lot of light on this case, but we have access to none of them. It's also unfortunate that many of these key players are now dead.
Did you know a guy named Rick Rigney? Went by Dog.
Rick Dog. That was Goodlet's lover, I guess, at the time. Why, did you interview Rick Dog?
He's passed away.
Now you've got John Fulham saying that he went to that home with Goodyear. And he was able to walk away as well.
Right.
That guy would be a wealth of information.
He would be a wealth of information. I would love to talk to John Fulham, but he's no longer with us.
Right.
That's the frustrating part. A lot of the witnesses, a lot of the primary people, even suspects, they're gone.
Right.
Like Leroy Bray. He's interviewed by an investigator from Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. Unfortunately, he's dead too.
Yeah.
Yet others are dead as well. Others that Goodyear himself said he was afraid of.
This is kind of a groundbreaking moment because you've never shown your face on camera.
I have done silhouette. Never before a face-to-face interview with the camera.
Why now?
There was a time when people were alive, had something to be afraid of. Now, it's been 30 years. It doesn't bother me anymore.
Goodyear only now feels safe to come forward because these people are dead. But who are these people? Were they the ones at the party Bray described that witnessed a murder and didn't come forward? Why might Goodyear be afraid of them? Was he actually just a lesser player that could be disposed of in the same way this unknown victim was? Perhaps it's worth noting that Goodyear comes forward in his first interview where he doesn't conceal his identity. And again, he says this is because the people he had to worry about are no longer alive. Well, coincidentally, this aligns with the time in which new interest has been taken in the case, and the remains that for years have been kept unidentified are now being analyzed for the first time. Were these people that Goodyear was afraid of also somehow keeping the remains from being looked at? If so, these people would be powerful players in the local area. But why would they want the remains to remain unidentified? Why might they want to hamper the investigation and halt funds to find out who exactly made up those 10,000 bone fragments? Perhaps these powerful players were the several people that Bray was introduced to. Perhaps these people were on the tapes that police never secured. Perhaps the power these people held was exerted over this case, and their grip was only released with their deaths. How do we make sense of the police incompetence? How do we make sense of the abandonment of protocol? How do we make sense of the continuous year-by-year block on finding out who exactly was killed at Fox Hollow Farms for a quarter of a century? The number of suspected victims now reaches up to 25, and they are still finding bones to this day. With Goodyear as an accomplice, a lot of things begin to make sense. His interactions with police were crafted as a controlled downfall for Herb. From the role of an accomplice, we have to look at things he was telling detectives differently. When detectives ask Goodyear his first impression of the house, he tells them that it wasn't lived in. Yeah, that this place wasn't lived in. That was the first impression of the entire property. It wasn't lived in. Goodyear would in fact go on to say that he felt the house hadn't been lived in for years. This is backed up by the fact the house had a raccoon infestation. The house was infested with raccoons that lived in the ceiling, which particularly affected the upstairs bedrooms where at minimum the children slept, but it's unclear where Herb and Julie's room was. The infestation resulted in the ceiling being covered in raccoon urine and feces, which seeped through the boards and caused the entire upstairs area to have a foul odor. The only rooms in the house which appeared to be in use were the bedrooms, while the rest of the house was filled with clutter. Unfortunately, we don't get to see the entire walkthrough that the police taped. We only get a glimpse of specific corners of the house with very low quality footage. I'm curious why that might be. The rooms that were also in use didn't appear to be used for normal activities. One of the kids' rooms had a closet that was filled not with clothes, but it was instead filled with camera equipment. Again, this is being pointed out from a man who was reportedly involved in the crimes, dropping hints to police. Mark also points out there were stray dogs on the property. Perhaps they kept them there to try and dispose of the bodies. No description is ever given that these dogs were pets of the Baumeisters. They have no names and there's no number on the amount of them either. If they actually lived in the house, they might find it troubling stray dogs, or at least dogs they don't claim ownership for, would be hanging around. With the clutter that littered the house, the raccoon infestation and the stray dogs roaming the property, it does look as though no one would live there. At the very least, it would be hard for anyone to live there, let alone a family of 5. Then there's the insider hinting to police that no one lived there and no one had lived there for years. Let's not forget Herb and Julie also owned another house in the city, all while making payments on Fox Hollow Farms. So what was the house used for? Well, obviously for murder, given the dozens of remains in the backyard alone. But what purpose did the murders serve? Steve Ainsworth, a cold case detective brought on to this case from the outside, noticed something peculiar about Mark's behavior on the grounds of Fox Hollow.
One of the things I noticed was he wasn't wearing any shoes. And you know, he has recently found God. I started thinking, biblically, when you take your shoes off, it's because you're on holy ground. I wonder if he thinks of that house and those grounds as being holy ground somehow.
In fact, according to a paranormal investigator that sat down with Mark, she says he told her Herb was in a local satanic cult with lots of members.
For instance, one interesting thing was he told us that Herb was part of a satanic cult or coven or whatever you want to call it in the area that had a ton of members.
The scene in which Herb himself was found was ritualistic, according to Vandegrift, who, to my knowledge, has not had his credibility questioned. So, was Fox Hollow Farms being used for ritual killings by a group of powerful individuals that had the ability to cover up this case for almost 3 decades? The search of the grounds was over around the time Herb's body turned up. In all, they found over 10,000 bone fragments and other items that would later match Bray's story, that being handcuffs and shotgun shells. One thing they never found among the fragments were the skulls. They found multiple mandibles that they would use to ID the first set of victims, but the skulls themselves were never found. By September, identifications came back for Stephen Hale, 26, Richard Hamilton, 20, Manuel Resendez, 31, and Roger Allen Goodlet, 33. Work proceeded on the Fox Hollow case, though not for long. David Linloff from Ohio was left as much in the dark after the search of Fox Hollow as he had been before. For over a decade now, Linloff had been investigating his own string of homicides just across the state line. Since 1980, young boys and grown men were disappearing only to turn up dead, all strangled, all from the gay scene in Indianapolis. Overall, 12 victims would turn up, with half of them being found in Ohio. The first being Eric Allen Rodiger on May 9th, 1985. After that was Michael Allen Glenn in August 1986, then John Paul Talbot in May 1989. Just around 3 months later in August, Stephen Elliott was found dead and strangled. Then the last 2 turned up just a year later in the same month. Clay Russell Boatman and Thomas Clavenger both turned up dead and strangled in August 1990. These were just the first victims in Ohio, but Linloff, of course, was aware that just a few miles away, both men and boys were turning up dead in just the same fashion as they were on his side of the state line. The last victim to be found was Otto Gary Becker, who turned up dead in a ditch in Henry County, Indiana on October 7th, 1991. After that, the bodies stopped turning up, and yet gay men from Indianapolis kept disappearing. When the bones on Fox Hollow were uncovered, and the victims not only matched the description, but the method, Linloff figured this was the guy. He could finally put the I-70 Strangler case to bed. But of course, as mentioned earlier, the case is still open. By 1991, Linloff had 2 solid pieces of physical evidence. He had a semen sample and a handprint. Both were left at different crime scenes. In 1991, Linloff was to meet with the FBI in Richmond, Indiana about his case. 2 weeks before this, he was to have the semen sample tested and analyzed and have the results passed out to each of the departments working on the I-70 case. when he went to his own department in Preble County, Ohio, and asked for the sample. Well, it was gone. Somehow the chain of custody for a key piece of evidence in a serial killer case failed, and the semen sample disappeared, and no one knew how. Now, years later, all they had was the palm print. Now all they needed was their suspect. In 1996, they got him. Dead, but they still had a chance to close their case for the I-70 stranglings. All they would need to do was get a match from the palm print they had with the palm print of Herbert Baumeister. The body was still in the hands of the Canadian authorities, and the case was still Hamilton County's. So David Lindelof, in contact with Sergeant Wisman, asked for a palm print from Herb's corpse. They of course obliged, and they had one of their own Hamilton County technicians sent up to Canada to collect a palm print from the corpse of the only suspect in both the Fox Hollow killings, but also the I-70 stranglings. The technician returns, and Lindelof himself goes and picks up the print and drops it off at the Miami Valley Crime Lab in Dayton, Ohio. Bad news, the print didn't take. It wasn't clear enough. Somehow in the process of extracting the print from Herb's body, the man whose entire job it is to conduct successful forensic tests failed to do so and made it all the way back down to Indiana and turned the print in without ever noticing. This level of incompetence is baffling, but there was still a chance to get another print, this time done right. Lindelof gets in contact with Mary Wilson to get another print, but she informs him that Herb, unfortunately, has already been cremated. Now, I can't imagine the level of anger Lindelof would be dealing with in this situation, but nor could I imagine the relief he felt when the very next day Mary calls him and tells him Herb actually hadn't been cremated. This time, IPD sent their technician up to Canada to get the print. Surely, whoever this individual was knew the last one didn't take, and they should take extra care to get a good print. The print comes back. Lindelof picks it up again, drops it off at the Miami Valley Crime Lab. Lindelof is once more informed the print didn't take. At this point, Lindelof is ready to go up there himself to get his print, but Mary Wilson soon informs him that Herb actually had been cremated, for real this time. There went the last piece of physical evidence that would ever potentially tie Herb to the I-70 killings, and thus close a case that is still open today. The only link besides the circumstantial evidence came in June 1997. After the word of Herb's crime spread, Sheriff James Bradbury of Hancock County, Indiana, compared the sketch of the man who was last seen leaving with I-70 strangler victim Michael Riley. To him, the comparison was a hit, and he quickly reached out to Riley's friend, who was the last to see Riley with the mysterious man that night, to look at the picture of Herb to see if he could make an identification. The friend at first claimed he wasn't the guy, but the photo he was looking at was a more recent one, and this murder happened over 10 years ago. Bradbury wastes no time in retrieving a photo from 1983, the exact year his friend was found, and right there on Herb's wrist was the watch he remembered so vividly all those years ago. Herb was that man. In the same year, Goodyear would appear on multiple programs with his back to the camera. He would be interviewed by a local station, but also A&E. And in both of his appearances, he told of Herb telling him that he had killed up to 50 to 60 people.
Did he say how many people he had killed?
Between 50 and 60.
He said he had killed between 50 and 60.
He never said. He insinuated. I asked him how many victims he had, and the response led me to believe between 50 and 60.
Herb insinuated to me that he had killed between 50 and 60 people. I believe at least 50 from what I know and from what I've seen.
None of the investigators have ever heard this number before, nor did they think the physical evidence backed it up. Still, this made them extremely suspicious. Why didn't Goodyear tell them this before? This would be lined up with other things Goodyear had been saying after the death of Herb and the search on Fox Hollow that I find interesting. He said he was having psychic intuitions, in which he suggested both Julie and a group of unidentifiable men were involved. Of course, by the time both interviews had aired, Police had received at the very minimum 3 stories from different people who had no contact with one another that all pointed the finger at Mark Goodyear. It was also being revealed to those that worked with Goodyear that he had lied the entire time about multiple things. He lied to Mary Wilson about seeing the blue car Goodlet got into the night he disappeared in Herb's garage, and he told her so. He told Connie, the partner to Virgil Vandegrift, that he indeed knew how to find the house the entire time. And now he apparently withheld information from investigators regarding over 50 homicides. Soon, Laura Musil, a local reporter, got in contact with Eddie Moore from the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, and he told her they were looking at Goodyear as a suspect.
In February of '97, after Mark Goodyear did an interview with A&E for a documentary, police heard information they hadn't heard before from Mark. He knew the method of death. Eddie Moore, who was a public information officer at the time, told me that they were considering Mark as a suspect.
But shortly after both of his appearances aired, he skipped town and was nowhere to be found.
But a roommate of Mark said that Mark had packed his bags and had left. They don't know where he went.
This could be to avoid police action, but given their track record, this is less likely. It's more likely Goodyear skipped town to avoid whoever he was afraid of all of these years, as the A&E program didn't mask his identity. His back was to the camera, but they addressed him as Mark Goodyear. It could be a bit of both, but it seems the people he was afraid of had more power than the police. Regardless, Carrie Milligan admits they never ruled Goodyear out.
Did you guys ever look at Goodyear as a suspect?
When you're investigating a case like this and you have someone like Goodyear pop up, you try to do your best to either eliminate them or incorporate them. And I don't know that if he was ever eliminated.
From the initial discovery, they find over 6,000 bone fragments, a number which over the years has reached 10,000 plus. In June of 1999, after delayed DNA testing, Naraki was able to identify 4 more victims and expand the number of total victims to 11. The victims identified in 1999 were Johnny L. Baer, Alan Wayne Broussard, Jeffrey Allen Jones, and Michael Kieran. It would be another 24 years before the next victim was identified. On the 10th of November, 2022, the election results were in, and Hamilton County had a new county coroner, Jeff Jellison. Later this very same month, he announces his intent to bring a new initiative on identifying the remains from Fox Hollow Farms. He takes office in January, and in October, he gets his first identification, Alan Lee Livingston. This whole initiative brings a lot of eyes to himself, but also to the case. In fact, many people have never heard of this case until Jeff made it his mission to identify the victims that have sat on a shelf for over 25 years. The month before his first identification, WRTV released an hour-long segment going over the history of the case and where it was at that time in 2023. Multiple news segments and news articles were released on his activities in the case, and he sat down for multiple interviews. But soon, he would be approached to tell his story for Hulu. Normally, there's no reason to go into this kind of information regarding the making of the sources I pull my information from, but this 4-part documentary is actually intertwined with the case itself with what it reveals. If you haven't watched it, do so, because from what I can tell, the guy making it is legit and is not afraid to ask questions that most avoid on purpose. The director of the 4-part series says they initially went out there to make the doc centered around Jeff, but then they saw the video of Mark Goodyear giving a tour of Fox Hollow to a team of paranormal investigators who also feature in the documentary. In this video, which is unfortunately not publicly available, Goodyear reveals that not only did he not see Herb just a handful of times he told police, but that he had actually dated Herb for 2 years.
But to get to your question, so it was originally centered on Jeff, because Jeff is coming in and saying, this is not right. We need to find out who these men were, and we need to let their families have the remains. And all these bones had been sitting on a shelf at the University of Indianapolis, which is where the lab was kind of working with them. So that was originally the entree into the story. But then there was this crazy other piece of it, which is that these paranormal investigators, these amateur paranormal investigators who have a YouTube channel called Paranormal Consequences, had come in and interviewed a guy who said he'd been a victim of Baumeister's. But over the course of their interview with him, in which he would not show his face, and he insisted on doing it at the house where all of the murders took place, he revealed that, he wasn't just with her one night. He had actually dated Baumeister for 2 years during which Baumeister was killing people, including some of this guy's friends.
The paranormal investigators themselves, Jane and Russ, were out there, of course, just for the property. Get footage of any potential supernatural activity. This was nothing new for the owner Rob Graves, who picked up the property in 2009, 50-50, with a silent partner. He had had film crews there before, and has even had the property cleansed multiple times. While he had the crew out there, he told them the story of Fox Hollow, and of course, Goodyear's story came up. Rob suggested to the paranormal investigators that they get in contact with Goodyear. Rob had befriended him a few years after he got the house, so he knew Mark well enough. He puts Jane in contact with Goodyear, and after a few texts, he calls her and begins to tell her things no one has heard before. The part about dating Herb for 2 years and making things up to the police to have them come out to the property.
And then Mark Goodyear told me he actually dated Herb Baumeister for 2 years.
Now, the opportunity was there for him to do harm to me, but no. See, I was never attacked. I made it up so that I could help get a search warrant for the property.
Immediately, Russ and Jane felt they needed to contact the authorities, and they actually sat down with Jeff Jellison, who used to be law enforcement, but of course, as the county coroner, there's nothing he could do. Nevertheless, they sat down with him on September 11th, 2023, and showed him the texts that Goodyear sent, but also the calls they had with him, where he was completely revising his story. Jellison assures them there's something there, so they run a plan by him to see what Goodyear is like while he's at the house. 6 days later, Russ and Jane roll into Fox Hollow Farms, and they let Goodyear give them a tour of the house that he treats with reverence. By the time they gather this footage, Steve Ainsworth had already been in contact with Jeff Jellison since April of that year. Steve Ainsworth being a cold case detective with an extensive history in law enforcement. It's unclear when exactly Steve began to take a serious look at this case, but I think it's safe to say Steve, and the director of the Hulu documentary, Alex Jablonski, had the same feeling once they actually looked into the files. After viewing the footage for himself, Alex began filing Freedom of Information Act requests on this case when they started filming, and over again Goodyear's name would pop up in the files. Makes sense after the almost 30 years of Goodyear being in front of the story, but the files were different. Others, people that Goodyear knew, and some that didn't, were implicating him in the crimes themselves. For the first time, it seems someone from outside the case was looking at this entire thing for what it was. He saw the call with John Egloff. He saw the interview with Fulham. He saw what Leroy Bray had reported to police, and with all of these stories pointing in one direction now matched with the odd behavior at Fox Hollow and Mark's admittance that he wasn't a survivor of Baumeister but actually had a 2-year relationship with him, it was looking like in their presence was not a potential victim of Herb, but actually an accomplice. They get in contact with Goodyear, and he agrees to tell his story. He wants to tell his story, and this time, for the first time, he's putting his face out on camera.
How are you able to get this guy's trust, Mark Goodyear? Because in the paranormal video, he doesn't want to show his face, but now he actually shows his face with you. How do you get somebody to trust you to do that?
So we met him, talked to him about what we wanted to discuss, but I think that we probably played it a little close to the vest about how much we knew. because I think, Mark is charismatic to a degree, and he is he knows how to put you on your back foot. And so I think that in meeting us, he was kind of like, I want to tell my story. I want to get it all out there. It was like, okay, great. And I was working with an amazing co-executive producer on this, Angela Borg. And she said, Mark, here's my cell phone. Talk to me anytime. And he starts texting her. He was texting her 500 times a day. I mean, he wanted to talk about this.
Initially, they kept what they knew close to the chest. They didn't let on that multiple people had come forward to police to point out Goodyear as anything but a survivor. So they approached Steve and asked how they should handle this. And in the last episode, you get to see Goodyear face questions he's never had to before. In this interview, he changed his story drastically from his initial telling in the 90s, but it is actually not the first version of this revision. It's actually very similar to the account he gave Rob Graves and Richard Estep in their book, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm. The book released September 8th, 2019, and covers Estep's paranormal investigation into Fox Hollow Farm. And much like the paranormal investigators that came after him, he also got to meet Goodyear and hear his story from his own mouth. Interestingly, this version has details Goodyear left out of his interview with Alex Jablonski that I find very telling. Right off the bat, Goodyear says Herb had two personalities and referred to himself in the third person. In fact, Goodyear would say Herb's personality split was due to being demonically possessed. Here also, for the first time and only time, do we get Goodyear admitting he's been to the farm not just more than once, but so many times he can't recount. Goodyear tells of an encounter he had in 2016 with the spirit of a victim no one has heard before. This spirit actually tells Goodyear who he was and how he was killed. Not that there was any other way that Goodyear would know who this victim was and how he was killed. More plausible ways, like perhaps being there when it happened. But no, apparently the spirit of Albert told him his backstory and how he was murdered. After telling the crew about Albert, Goodyear once again drove home the fact Herb had two personalities. That whenever he was with Herb and he dissociated into another personality, it was as if a switch had been flipped and a visible change would come over him, like another person was looking out of the same eyes. Next, he would go on to tell the paranormal investigators that a spirit haunted Fox Hollow, but it was an evil spirit and not one of the victims. In fact, it was Herb's accomplice. Apparently, Goodyear knew who Herb's accomplice was the whole time. He even says this accomplice was the one who killed Herb in Canada, and the reason he never said anything was because he was afraid of the man. He also says this man killed many women at Fox Hollow Farms. Goodyear says this man haunts the grounds of the farm, but he never says he got this information from the spirit like Albert, meaning he likely knew Herb's accomplice while he was alive and knew about the deaths that took place there at the hands of this man and never reported it to police. He is admitting right here that he knew that murders were happening at Fox Hollow. He is admitting that he knew Herb had an accomplice, and he is admitting that he knew Herb was in fact murdered, and this person that he was likely in contact with was free not only from prison, but from police suspicion. They never even knew who this guy was, and we still don't to this day. Finally, Goodyear says that good and evil spirits haunt Fox Hollow, but one in particular may be responsible for the deaths. Goodyear calls it the Frog, and he goes on to say that Herb and his accomplice both haunt Fox Hollow. Herb's accomplice apparently thinks it is using the Frog, but the Frog is in fact using him. He calls the Frog a liar and a trickster, and says that it has been there long before Herb bought the property. Now, how in the world could Goodyear possibly know this? Goodyear is constantly referring to his God. He knows his God is real, and it was there with him the entire time. Now we know that time was more than the one night, and there his God was all the while. Goodyear never says he's a Christian. He never proclaims a particular faith. We know he views Fox Hollow as a holy place and treats it with reverence, something that Steve Ainsworth would point out himself. One has to wonder who his God is. It doesn't appear to be Jesus Christ. So what does he mean when he says he knows his God is real and was there with him the entire time? How does he know that this frog entity is a trickster and a liar? And how does he know it has been there for a long time? Something I find interesting and worth pointing out here again is that another paranormal investigation team sat down with Goodyear and was told something even more damning in terms of what was really going on at Fox Hollow Farms during the murders. Again, Goodyear told them Herb was in a satanic cult or coven that had a ton of members. All of this is left out of his newest telling, while still holding on to the same fundamental changes. Rob Graves, who has befriended Goodyear and has known him for a decade, has a problem himself with Goodyear's story and finds it difficult not to point the finger at him. When asked what leads him to believe that Goodyear knows more than he's letting on, he says it's not good that Mark says he's seen bodies in the backyard. More accurately, he says it's not a good thing to say.
What has he said that's led you to think he knows more than he's saying?
I mean, he's told me things like he had seen some bodies here, and that's not good. That's not good. I mean, to say that
Graves himself is a strange character and not so innocuous.
You know, my given name is Robert, but I've always gone by Rob, and then of course my last name just happens to be Graves. We've never put it on the mailbox, but there's some irony in the fact that if you say it together, you're robbing Graves.
Then I got a phone call one day that a lady had told me that Rob has bones.
In his personal possession?
In his kitchen, in a drawer. So I said, can't have that. That's evidence. I need to identify those. So he did, and he says he takes them occasionally down to the University of Indianapolis. Well,
occasionally,
you know, these are remains. These are people, deceased individuals that you just decide to go out and in your backyard and kick up bones, and then not call law enforcement or not call the coroner.
Right. That should have been the first phone call.
Right. So Rob had explained that, and I sat Rob down and had a conversation and explained that's not the way we're going to do it in the future.
Not turning in bones he found in the backyard is not the worst of it though. Graves also told Jellison that he was approached by a lead detective for the case, and for $10,000 he was offered a box of evidence.
I called Rob over and I said, hey, you know what? I really question some of these photos that you have, because they look to me to be law enforcement photos. They had scales in them, and, you know, not just something you just take your camera out and snap a picture of. And Rob told me that the lead detective showed up at his front door and offered to sell him a box of evidence in this case for $10,000. Well, Rob told me he didn't buy it.
Oh.
Yeah, he didn't buy it. He said that some of the photographs he had were given to him by law enforcement, but he didn't buy the box.
In the making of the 4-part documentary, many involved with the case were contacted to participate, but only one responded.
Yeah, I mean, so the first of all, I should mention, we reached out to every single investigator who is still alive and was part of this case, and only one was willing to speak to us. So, so one from Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, and one kind of person who was tangentially involved from the Indianapolis PD, but that's it, out of probably 11. So I think that they are aware that there are a lot of questions around this case.
After the documentary came out, there was no reaction from Hamilton County, something that surprised Alex Jablonski.
The one place that there hasn't been any real reaction is the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. They refused to speak to us on camera when we were making this. I thought for sure I was going to get reached out to. They're going to say, hey, what material do you have? Maybe even a subpoena, and none of that. And I asked, folks in Hamilton County, what's going on? They're like, nah, they're not touching it.
There appears to be no effort to reopen the case, no interest in the new evidence or unfollowed leads. This inaction and uninterest mirrors the initial investigation in the 90s, something that both Steve Ainsworth and Alex Jablonski question.
When you have somebody that's a good suspect and you're just trying to, you're working on a warrant or you're getting ready to arrest them, we would always have surveillance on somebody. Baumeister got away with nobody surveilling him.
And I didn't know this until I spoke to other, kind of career homicide detectives who said, it is policing 101 that when you have a suspect and you are writing the arrest warrant, you have that suspect surveilled. They never surveilled her. They didn't even have a car parked outside of the lake house, which is all it would have taken, is one police cruiser sitting outside the lake house to know where he was going to be. And that is one of the pieces of this case that, viewers seem to struggle to understand. And I'm right there with them. I do not understand how that happened.
In hindsight, we probably should have surveilled him, but we did not.
Despite the inaction, the case moves forward, with or without Hamilton County's interest. Just this year, we got the 4-part documentary that exposed new evidence detrimental to the initial story. We got multiple case files available to the public, and perhaps most importantly, we got a new identification. Daniel Thomas Halloran was not listed among the suspected victims, and yet almost 30 years later, his case has been closed. Work continues on this case today, and it seems nothing will slow Jeff Jellison down, nor Alex Jablonski, who says he now has enough information to make another 8 episodes.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, we have enough material to do another 8 episodes.
This case is seemingly far from closed, and the work on it far from over. I suspect this will only be a part 1 in a series, but that has yet to be seen. For now, we will stick with what we have and draw the conclusions we can from it. So, here are my overall thoughts on the case. Again, all of this is opinion. None of this has been proven in the court of law. Everyone mentioned in this video is innocent until proven guilty. With all of that out of the way, here is my opinion. With the info I have available to me, it appears Herb was born into a generational SRA cult that had ties to the elite of the local area. These ties came from Herb's father, who we know little about. He was an Army veteran of the Second World War and continues the trend of serial killers either belonging to the military themselves or having fathers that served. Herb seems to have played the role of the mind-controlled patsy. It's unclear when he was selected for this role, but to me it seems that's ultimately the part he played. Julie appeared to me to be Herb's handler, selected from Indiana University, at least from the outside, but she also comes from a military background, and who's to say her family didn't belong to the same cult? That puts the kids in a tough position because as far as we know, they have never come forward about any of the things I have just stated here. But given their family background, there might be a reason for that. I'm going through this quickly here because I don't want to bog down the end of the video rehashing everything we just went over for the past 2 hours. But I will be speaking about my general thoughts on the case in a less scripted and more casual way on the members only section and the Patreon. So, Julie was matched with Herb while at college, and then 4 years go by, and they get married with no info in between. This seems to me in part to be a programming phase. After he gets married 6 months later, he's in LaRue D. Carter for 2 months, an institution staffed by the very same people Herb was on and off campus with. But what purpose would all of this serve? The killings served as ritual sacrifices to their god. The killings were also filmed. Whether the tapes were simply added to the collection of the elite or were meant to be sold is unclear. If this was a group of lowlifes, we would know all about it. But the fact these crimes were committed by people who had the power to, in my opinion, stop the police from doing their job and cover this up proves we are dealing with individuals who had more power than the police. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments and like the video to help push this information into the algorithm. I want to say thank you to all of the new subs and new members. We've got 2 cases down and so many more to go. I hope you are all ready. With that, I'll see you in the next video or in the members only section. Until next time.